Thousands of years ago, long before modern history was written, people across the world told stories of a terrifying disaster. A flood so massive it destroyed entire civilizations, mountains disappeared beneath rising waters. Cities were swallowed by the sea. And only a few survivors remained to rebuild the world. These stories appear in cultures separated by oceans and continents. Ancient texts, oral traditions, religious scriptures, all telling similar tales of a great flood. In the Epic of Gilgamesh, a man named Utnapishtim survives a divine flood sent to destroy humanity. In the Bible, Noah builds an ark to save life on earth. In Greek mythology, Deucalion and his wife survive a world-destroying flood. How could so many different cultures tell such similar stories? Is it possible that these legends are based on real prehistoric disasters? Tonight, we begin exploring one of the greatest mysteries in human history. The legend of the Great Flood. Flood myths are among the most common stories found in human cultures. Anthropologists have identified hundreds of flood traditions from societies around the world. In ancient Mesopotamia, one of the earliest recorded flood stories appears in the Epic of Gilgamesh. In this story, the gods decide to destroy humanity with a massive flood. But one man, Utnapishtim, is warned in advance. He builds a large boat and saves animals and his family. After the flood ends, the boat comes to rest on a mountain. Centuries later, a similar story appears in the Bible. In the book of Genesis, Noah receives a warning from God about a coming flood. He constructs a massive ark and saves pairs of animals from destruction. After 40 days of rain, the waters slowly recede. The ark eventually comes to rest on Mount Ararat. The similarities between these stories have fascinated historians for centuries. Flood myths were not limited to the Middle East. Ancient Greek mythology also contains a strikingly similar story. According to legend, the king of the gods Zeus became angry with humanity. He decided to destroy the world with a great flood. Only one couple survived. A man named Deucalion and his wife Pyrrha. They escaped the flood by building a boat and drifting across the waters. When the floodwaters finally receded, they landed on Mount Parnassus. According to the myth, they later repopulated the world by throwing stones behind them, which transformed into new humans. While the details vary, the core elements remain familiar. A divine warning, a massive flood, a small group of survivors, and the rebirth of humanity. Flood myths are not limited to ancient Mediterranean cultures. Similar stories appear in many other parts of the world. In ancient China, legends describe a catastrophic flood that covered large parts of the land. One of the most famous heroes of this story is Yu the Great, who is said to have controlled the floodwaters and founded the first Chinese dynasty. Across the Pacific Ocean, many indigenous cultures in the Americas also preserve flood legends. Some Native American traditions describe a time when rising waters covered the land and forced survivors to seek refuge on mountains or in boats. In parts of South America, similar stories appear in the traditions of ancient Andean cultures. These accounts often describe divine punishment, massive floods, and the survival of only a few individuals. The similarities between these stories have raised an important question. Could they all be memories of real events that occurred thousands of years ago? To understand the possible origins of flood legends, scientists look to the end of the last ice age. Around 20,000 years ago, enormous ice sheets covered large portions of the northern hemisphere. As the climate warmed, these glaciers began to melt. The melting ice released enormous amounts of water into the oceans. Over thousands of years, global sea levels rose dramatically. Coastal regions where early humans once lived were slowly submerged. Entire landscapes disappeared beneath the sea. In some regions, the rising waters may have appeared sudden and catastrophic. Communities living near rivers or coastlines could have experienced devastating floods. These traumatic events may have been remembered and passed down through generations as stories. Over time, these stories could have evolved into the flood myths we know today. Human societies have always preserved memories through storytelling. Long before written language, oral traditions helped communities remember important events. Natural disasters often became powerful cultural stories. Volcanic eruptions, earthquakes, and floods. Over many generations, these stories may change and grow more dramatic. Details become symbolic. Events become mythological. But beneath these legends, there may still be echoes of real prehistoric disasters. Events that deeply affected early human communities. Flood legends appear across nearly every continent on Earth. But one location may hold a particularly intriguing clue. A vast body of water between Europe and Asia, a sea that may once have been a freshwater lake. Some scientists believe that thousands of years ago, a massive wall of water suddenly flooded this region. If true, it could represent one of the most dramatic floods in human history. The mystery of the Black Sea flood. Imagine waking up one morning and seeing the sea rushing toward your home, not slowly, not gently, but like a wall of water devouring the land. Fields disappear, villages vanish. Entire cultures are forced to run for their lives. Some scientists believe this exact moment happened around 7,600 years ago. A massive body of water suddenly burst through a natural barrier and flooded a vast region that had once been dry land. The place? The Black Sea. Was this one of the real events behind the ancient flood legends? Could this catastrophe have inspired stories that later appeared in the Epic of Gilgamesh, the Bible, and other ancient texts? Or is the truth even stranger? Tonight, we explore the mystery of a sea that may have swallowed an entire world. Thousands of years ago, the region around the Black Sea looked very different. Today, the Black Sea is one of the largest inland seas on Earth. But during the last ice age, it may not have been a sea at all. Instead, many geologists believe it was a giant freshwater lake. Its shores were lower, its waters calmer, and around it, fertile plains stretched for miles. Perfect land for early farming communities. Humans had already begun forming villages. They raised animals. They grew crops. They built small settlements near rivers and lakes. Life seemed stable. But far away, something was changing that would transform the entire region. The glaciers were melting. Around 12,000 years ago, the Earth began warming after the last ice age. Massive ice sheets covering North America and Northern Europe slowly melted. And when glaciers melt, the oceans rise. Sea levels around the world began climbing dramatically. Over thousands of years, coastlines moved inland. Entire landscapes disappeared beneath the water. But in one place, scientists believe the change may have happened suddenly. At the narrow strait connecting the Mediterranean to the Black Sea. Today we call this strait the Bosporus Strait. But thousands of years ago, this channel may have been blocked by natural land, separating the Mediterranean Sea from the lower freshwater lake of the Black Sea Basin, until one day, the barrier failed. In the late 1990s, two geologists proposed a shocking idea. Their names were William Ryan and Walter Pittman. They suggested that around 5600 BC, the Mediterranean Sea broke through the Bosporus barrier, and when it did, an unimaginable torrent of water rushed north. According to their calculations, the flood could have been 200 times stronger than Niagara Falls. The salt water poured into the lower freshwater basin. Day after day, month after month, year after year, the lake rose rapidly, coastlines retreated, farmland vanished beneath the waves, villages were forced to flee inland. Within a relatively short time, an enormous new sea was created, the Black Sea as we know it today. If true, this would have been one of the most dramatic flooding events in human prehistory. And people living there would never forget it. In the early 2000s, underwater archaeologists began exploring the depths of the Black Sea. One of the most famous explorers involved was Robert Ballard, the same oceanographer who discovered the wreck of the RMS Titanic. Ballard and his team searched the seabed for clues. What they found was astonishing. Using sonar imaging, they detected structures beneath the water, possible ancient shorelines, and even what appeared to be remnants of human settlements. In some places, they discovered wooden structures preserved in deep, oxygen-poor water. These findings suggested that people once lived in areas now hundreds of feet underwater, exactly where the flood theory predicted. But not all scientists agree on what happened. Some researchers argue the flooding was slow and gradual, not catastrophic. Instead of a sudden deluge, they believe the water level may have risen over centuries, giving people time to adapt. If that is true, then the Black Sea flood might not have been dramatic enough to inspire global flood myths. But other evidence keeps the debate alive. Sediment layers from the seafloor show signs of sudden changes. Marine organisms appear abruptly in layers where freshwater species once lived, suggesting a rapid transformation from lake to sea. If the flood really happened quickly, then thousands of people may have witnessed their homeland vanish beneath the waves. And survivors might have carried the memory of that disaster across continents, stories that would later evolve into legends. Flood myths appear in cultures across the world, from Mesopotamia to India to the Americas. The story of Utnapishtim in the Epic of Gilgamesh. The story of Noah in the Bible. Both describe massive floods sent to wipe out humanity. In these stories, survivors escape in boats, and afterward, they rebuild civilization. Could these myths trace their roots back to real disasters like the Black Sea flood? If migrating survivors spread the story across the ancient world, the legend could have traveled far beyond its origin, transforming over thousands of years into sacred stories. But the Black Sea flood might not have been the only catastrophe humanity faced. In fact, another event may have been even more devastating. About 12,800 years ago, the Earth may have experienced a sudden climate disaster. Temperatures plunged, glaciers advanced again, and scientists discovered strange evidence scattered across multiple continents. Burned landscapes, melted minerals, and mysterious microscopic particles from space. Some researchers believe the cause was a cosmic impact, an event now known as the Younger Dryas impact hypothesis. Could a comet have triggered global flooding and climate chaos? And could this be the real origin of the world's oldest flood legends? Picture this. It's the end of the last ice age. Our planet is a world of giants. Gigantic glaciers, kilometers thick, cover huge parts of the northern hemisphere. Rivers are frozen solid. Sea levels are so low you could walk from Britain to France. But as the world slowly warms up, these massive ice sheets begin to melt. And when they do, they unleash floods so powerful, they reshape entire continents. We're not talking about your average river overflowing its banks. We're talking about walls of water hundreds of meters high, rushing across the land faster than a speeding car, carving out canyons, tossing around boulders the size of houses, and leaving behind scars on the earth that are still visible today. These were the megafloods of the Ice Age. For tens of thousands of years, Earth was in a deep freeze, a period we call the last glacial maximum. Massive ice sheets blanketed North America, Europe, and Asia. But around 20,000 years ago, things started to change. Global temperatures began to rise, and the Great Melt began. As the glaciers melted, unimaginable volumes of water pooled into enormous glacial lakes. The only thing holding them back were natural dams, often made of ice. And as you can imagine, an ice dam isn't the most stable structure. When these dams failed, the results were catastrophic. Suddenly, vast lakes of meltwater would burst free, releasing floods unlike anything humanity has ever witnessed. It was a force of nature on a truly biblical scale. One of the most famous and well-studied of these megafloods happened in what is now the northwestern United States. Back then, a massive finger of the Cordilleran ice sheet crept down from Canada and blocked the Clark Fork River in Montana. This created a gigantic lake behind it, known as Glacial Lake Missoula. At its peak, this lake was huge. It held more water than Lake Erie and Lake Ontario combined. All of this water was trapped behind a dam made of nothing but ice, about 2,000 feet high. Eventually, the immense pressure of the water became too much. The ice dam began to fracture, and then it collapsed. When it did, an unimaginable torrent of water, soil, and rock burst across the landscape. This was one of the largest floods known in all of geological history. When Glacial Lake Missoula burst free, the water surged westward with terrifying force. The floodwaters roared across what is now Idaho, Washington, and Oregon, heading for the Pacific Ocean. The flow rate was staggering 10 times the combined flow of all the rivers in the world today. At certain points, the water might have been moving at over 100 kilometers per hour. It wasn't just water, it was a liquid bulldozer. Entire landscapes were scoured away in a matter of hours and days. Gigantic channels, known today as the channeled scablands, were carved directly into solid basalt rock by this violent flood. The sheer power is hard to comprehend. Massive boulders, weighing hundreds of tons, were picked up like pebbles and carried for miles, left scattered across the landscape like strange, misplaced monuments. And here's the truly mind-boggling part. Scientists now believe this wasn't a one-time event. The ice dam would eventually reform. The lake would fill up again over decades or centuries, and then the dam would collapse once more. This cycle of catastrophic flooding may have happened dozens, maybe even 100 times. Over thousands of years, these repeated megafloods dramatically reshaped the entire Pacific Northwest. But the story of how we figured all this out is almost as dramatic as the floods themselves. In the early 20th century, A geologist named J. Harlan Bretz started exploring the unusual landscapes of eastern Washington. He saw things that just didn't make sense with the geology of his time. He saw enormous dry canyons carved into hard rock. He found giant ripple marks, not in sand, but etched into the ground, some of them 30 feet high and hundreds of feet apart. And he saw those scattered giant boulders far too large for any normal river to move. Bretz proposed a shocking, almost heretical idea. He suggested that this entire region had been carved not by slow, gradual erosion, but by a single, massive, prehistoric flood of unimaginable scale. At the time, the scientific community basically laughed him out of the room. The prevailing belief was that all geological change happens slowly, uniformly, over millions of years. The idea of a sudden, cataclysmic flood was seen as unscientific, almost biblical. For decades, Bretz was an outcast, his theory dismissed, but he held firm. And slowly, evidence started to mount in his favor. Finally, in the 1950s, with the advent of aerial photography, geologists could see the full picture. They saw the giant ripple marks from above. And most importantly, they discovered the ancient shoreline of the culprit, glacial Lake Missoula. This discovery was the smoking gun. It confirmed that an enormous Ice Age lake had existed, and it was the only possible source for a flood of the magnitude Bretz had described. Today, J. Harlan Bretz's once controversial theory is a cornerstone of geology. The Missoula floods are a textbook example of catastrophic geology, but they weren't the only ones. As we look around the world, we're finding evidence of similar megafloods everywhere. In Central Asia, along the Altai Mountains, another series of enormous glacial lakes repeatedly burst their dams. These Altai floods may have been even larger than the Missoula floods, carving out immense valleys and leaving behind their own giant ripple marks. In Europe, the melting of the Scandinavian ice sheet released vast amounts of water that reshaped river systems and poured into the North Sea and the English Channel. For any early humans living in these regions, these events would have been beyond terrifying. Imagine watching a wall of water hundreds of feet high appear on the horizon, moving faster than you can run. Entire valleys would have been submerged in minutes. Settlements, hunting grounds, everything you knew, wiped from the face of the earth. Survivors would have been forced to flee to higher ground, carrying with them the traumatic memory of the event. It's no wonder that so many ancient cultures from all over the world have flood myths in their oral traditions. Stories of a great flood that cleansed the world. While these are complex cultural stories, some scientists speculate that the very real, very traumatic experiences of these Ice Age megafloods could have been the seed for some of these ancient legends. By the time the Ice Age finally ended, the face of our planet had been transformed. Rivers had charted new courses, new valleys and canyons scarred the land. And as all that melted glacier ice poured into the oceans, sea levels began to rise dramatically. Over thousands of years, the seas rose by about 120 meters, or nearly 400 feet. The world our ancestors inhabited was constantly changing beneath their feet. Coastal plains that were once vast hunting grounds slowly disappeared beneath the waves. Land bridges that connected continents were submerged. Islands were formed where mountains once stood on dry land. Many of the places where early humans lived and thrived are now deep underwater. We can see the remnants of these lost worlds. Take Doggerland, for example. It was a huge area of low-lying land that connected Great Britain to mainland Europe. It was a rich landscape of hills, rivers, and marshes, likely teeming with life, including human settlements. But as the seas rose, it was slowly inundated, eventually becoming the North Sea we know today. Fishermen still occasionally drag up ancient tools and the bones of mammoths from this lost land. Another massive lost continent was Sundaland in Southeast Asia. During the Ice Age, low sea levels connected the islands of Sumatra, Java, and Borneo to the Asian mainland, creating a vast tropical landmass. As the ice melted, this paradise was gradually drowned, creating the archipelago we see today. These rising seas and catastrophic floods weren't just geological events. They were human events. They displaced populations, forced migrations, and fundamentally altered the course of human history. They are a powerful reminder that our planet is not a static stage, but a dynamic and sometimes violent system. The scars left by the Ice Age megafloods tell a story of immense power, of sudden change, and of the incredible resilience of life. They show us a world that once was, and hint at the incredible forces that continue to shape our planet today. Imagine standing on the edge of a cliff, looking down at a vast empty basin, a desert where a sea should be. Below you lies a landscape of salt flats, deep canyons, and scorching winds. Hard to imagine today. But scientists now believe that millions of years ago, the Mediterranean Sea nearly vanished, evaporated, gone, leaving behind a gigantic basin thousands of meters deep. Then one day, the Atlantic Ocean broke through. What followed may have been the largest flood in Earth's history. A flood so powerful it filled an entire sea basin. In this episode, we explore the terrifying moment when the Mediterranean returned in an event known as the Zanclean Megaflood, and what scientists discovered might completely change how we understand ancient floods. Around 5.9 million years ago, something extraordinary happened. The connection between the Atlantic Ocean and the Mediterranean closed. The narrow channel we know today as the Strait of Gibraltar became blocked. Without fresh ocean water flowing in, the Mediterranean began to evaporate. Year after year, century after century, eventually most of the sea disappeared. This event is known as the Messinian Salinity Crisis. Instead of a sea, the region became a massive basin filled with salt deposits. Some scientists estimate the Mediterranean water level dropped more than 1.5 kilometers. Imagine standing where the modern coast of Italy is today, and seeing a vast canyon stretching across the horizon. Rivers like the Nile River carved enormous valleys as they flowed down into the deep basin. It was one of the strangest landscapes Earth has ever seen. But it wouldn't last forever. While the Mediterranean basin dried out, the Atlantic Ocean remained full. And the only thing separating the two was land at the Strait of Gibraltar. Over time, erosion weakened the natural barrier. Water pressure from the Atlantic kept building. Imagine a gigantic dam holding back an entire ocean. Eventually, the barrier collapsed. And when it did, the flood that followed was beyond anything humans have ever witnessed. Scientists believe the Zanclean megaflood began around 5.33 million years ago. When the Atlantic finally broke through the Strait of Gibraltar, water surged into the empty Mediterranean basin. But this was no ordinary flood. Computer models suggest water may have rushed in at speeds up to 300 kilometers per hour. The flow could have been 1,000 times stronger than the Amazon River, a waterfall possibly over 1 kilometer high may have formed at the entrance. The sound alone would have been unimaginable. A roar heard across hundreds of kilometers. Day after day, month after month, the basin slowly filled. Scientists estimate the Mediterranean may have filled in a few months to 2 years. In geological terms, that is almost instantaneous. An entire sea reborn. For many years, this event remained only a theory. But modern research began uncovering clues. Deep beneath the Mediterranean floor, geologists found enormous erosion channels. These channels appear to have been carved by massive water flows. Satellite mapping and sonar imaging revealed gigantic underwater valleys. Some researchers believe these valleys formed during the megaflood. Sediment layers also tell the story. Thick deposits of salt from the Messinian Salinity Crisis lie beneath younger marine sediments. This suggests the basin dried out and was later refilled, exactly as the megaflood theory predicts. In recent years, researchers from the University of Southampton and other institutions modeled the flood using advanced computer simulations. Their results showed that such an event was not only possible, it was likely inevitable. The Zanclean megaflood happened millions of years before humans existed. But it proves something important. Earth is capable of flooding events on unimaginable scales, and smaller versions of these catastrophes may have happened during human history. For example, the flooding of the Black Sea, the rise of sea levels after the last ice age, massive glacial lake outbursts when glaciers melted. Enormous lakes sometimes formed behind ice dams. When those dams broke, walls of water rushed across continents. These events are called glacial lake outburst floods. Some of them reshaped entire landscapes in days. If ancient humans witnessed disasters like these, their stories might have survived as legends. Legends of a world swallowed by water. Across the world, ancient cultures share remarkably similar flood stories. In Mesopotamia, a hero builds a boat to survive a divine flood. In the Bible, Noah saves humanity and the animals. In India, the god Vishnu warns a man about a coming deluge. How could so many cultures remember the same kind of disaster? Was there a single event behind these myths? Or did humanity survive multiple floods across thousands of years? thousands of years before modern history. Before the pyramids, before the great empires of Rome or Greece. A story was written on clay tablets. A story about a catastrophic flood that destroyed the world. It was recorded in one of the oldest literary works ever discovered, the Epic of Gilgamesh. In this ancient story, the gods decide to wipe out humanity. But one man is secretly warned. He builds a massive boat. He gathers animals. And he survives the great flood that destroys civilization. If this sounds familiar, it's because a very similar story appears thousands of years later in the Bible. But here's the real mystery. Where did the first flood story come from? Was it just mythology? Or was it based on a real disaster that ancient people witnessed? Tonight, we explore the world's first recorded flood story and the ancient catastrophe that may have inspired it. To understand the story of the Great Flood, we must travel to the cradle of civilization, the land between two great rivers, the Tigris River and the Euphrates River. This region is known as Mesopotamia. Around 5,000 years ago, this fertile land gave birth to some of the first cities in human history. Cities like Ur, Uruk, and Eridu. Here, early civilizations developed writing, agriculture, and complex societies. But these cities shared a constant danger: flooding. The Tigris and Euphrates rivers could rise suddenly after heavy rains or melting snow in distant mountains. Entire settlements could be submerged, fields destroyed, homes washed away overnight. For ancient people, floods were terrifying forces of nature, and these disasters became woven into their myths. For thousands of years, the story of the Great Flood was forgotten, buried beneath the ruins of ancient cities. Then in the 19th century, archaeologists excavating the ruins of Nineveh made a remarkable discovery. Thousands of clay tablets written in cuneiform script. These tablets belonged to the library of the Assyrian king Ashurbanipal. Among them was a story unlike anything scholars had seen before, a long epic about a legendary king. His name was Gilgamesh. As scholars translated the tablets, they uncovered something shocking. Inside the epic was a detailed story of a massive flood. A story written more than 1,000 years before the Bible. In the epic, the gods grow angry with humanity. They decide to destroy the world with a great flood. But one god secretly warns a man named Utnapishtim. He tells him to build a huge boat, a vessel large enough to survive the coming disaster. Utnapishtim gathers his family. He brings animals aboard. Then the storm begins. According to the tablets, the storm raged for 6 days and 7 nights. The flood waters covered the land. Cities vanished beneath the sea. Human civilization was nearly wiped out. Finally, the waters receded. Utnapishtim released birds to search for land. When one bird did not return, he knew the world was safe again. If this story sounds familiar, it should, because it closely resembles the story of Noah from the Bible. Could this ancient story be based on a real event? Some archaeologists think so. Excavations in Mesopotamian cities revealed thick layers of flood sediment. In the ancient city of Shiropak, archaeologists found a massive flood layer dating to around 2900 BC. This suggests a huge regional flood may have devastated several cities at the same time. If people survived such a disaster, the memory of it could have passed down through generations, eventually becoming the legend recorded in the Epic of Gilgamesh. But Mesopotamia wasn't the only place where flood stories appear. Similar legends exist across the entire world. In India, the god Vishnu warns a man named Manu about a coming flood. In ancient China, the hero Yu the Great is said to have controlled catastrophic floods. Indigenous cultures of the Americas also describe ancient deluges that destroyed the world. How could so many different cultures share similar stories? Some researchers believe these myths preserve memories of rising seas after the last ice age. Between 12,000 and 7,000 years ago, sea levels rose dramatically as glaciers melted. Entire coastal civilizations may have been lost. If ancient people witnessed these events, their stories may have survived for thousands of years, passed down as legends. Legends of a world drowned by water. The truth about the Great Flood may never be fully known. But the evidence suggests something remarkable. Across different continents and different cultures, humanity remembers the same kind of disaster, a time when the waters rose, a time when civilization nearly disappeared. Whether these stories were inspired by the flooding of the Black Sea, the melting of Ice Age glaciers, or regional disasters in Mesopotamia, they remind us of one thing. Our planet has changed dramatically before, and it will continue to change again. The legends of the Great Flood may not just be myths. They may be echoes of real catastrophes, recorded in humanity's oldest memories. And so, Gilgamesh's journey for immortality concludes, but ours is just beginning. We've traveled through ancient Uruk, battled Humbaba, and faced the Great Flood together. If you found this journey through Mesopotamia as fascinating as I did, there's a simple way to continue our adventures into the past. We have countless more stories from ancient civilizations waiting to be unearthed, from the pyramids of Egypt to the philosophical halls of Greece. To join our fellowship of history explorers, I ask you this. *Zubzuma am UK-M*. In the ancient Akkadian tongue, that means subscribe and like. By doing so, you ensure you won't miss our next expedition into the annals of history. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next chapter.